Philippians chapter 4. Good to be with you all this evening. We have a good number out on this chilly day. Hope you've all got your bread and milk prepared for maybe just the occasional snowflake. I guess we'll find out, won't we? This evening, we're going to be talking about a topic that is probably not unfamiliar to us around this time of the year. Most often, we talk about forming new habits and new goals around the start of a new year, whether that be health goals, whether that be personal goals, career goals, reading goals even. This is the time of year that we tend to break into those new habits and new goals. And talking about habits specifically, we all have them. Whether we notice them or not, whether we want to have them or not, we all have our own habits. And what does that look like from person to person? Well, it is different. And what we'll find is that what we do, the habits that we fall into, when we aren't filled with pressing engagements and chaos, the chaos that often comes with life, those things, the things that we involve ourselves in, often say a lot more about us than really anything else. Because oftentimes we want to identify ourselves with things that we want to do, things that we intend to do, but oftentimes we don't see the very things that we are involved in. We don't notice those things in ourselves. In the book of Philippians, in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 9, Paul says here, let's actually back up to verse 8 here just to give a little bit of context. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. So essentially what Paul is saying here is that you have learned certain things, you've received certain things, you've been taught certain things. And so now what you need to do is you go out and do them yourself, right? And you make them a part of your life, and the God of peace will be with you. You practice these habits, we might say. Well, the question that we might ask, of course this is a term that we hear a lot of times, but what even are habits to begin with? What are they? Well, if we, as we often do, just go to the dictionary definition, just the basic dictionary definition. Oxford Dictionary describes it and defines it as a settled or regular tendency or practice, especially one that is hard to give up. And it's that last phrase that's the kicker. It's that last part that makes a habit have the potential to be really good or really bad because of the nature of this thing is really hard to give up, right? And we understand that. Why are they hard to give up? Well, it's because they are a part of us, right? They are ingrained in our very core, in our very fiber. They define who we are. And yet, many people, again, don't even recognize that they have certain habits. Abby and I joke with one another, still being relatively newlywed, though I think we're kind of past that threshold at this point. We notice certain tics with one another, right? And if you've been married for any length of time, you notice those things. Mine is that I tend to leave cups and mugs out by the sink without really even thinking about it because I'm not done using that, right? But I don't think about it, right? I'm just leaving it there because I'm intending to use it later. With Abby, it has been, she's gotten better at it. She tends to leave cabinets open and I have to go back and close them because she doesn't notice it, and so I'll get up in the middle of the night and maybe hit my head or something. So we understand those things. Those are silly examples. There are more serious habits that we need to keep in mind. When it comes to our culture today, and this may seem like beating a dead horse, but I don't think we need to stop mentioning it. We are in an age of information more than ever. And we have been programmed in many ways to want that information. We get a vibration in our pocket and we reach for that phone and we look, what Sports Center's saying? Oh, Saban retired. Oh man, we got oh, travesty, right? And everybody's been dealing with that this week. Or maybe that's been a good thing for you if you're on the other end. You're checking your Pinterest boards, you're checking your Facebook, you're checking whatever, right? It's a knee-jerk response. But even thinking about just your daily routine, the alarm clock goes off at 5:30, 6:30, whenever. The first thing you do is you roll into the kitchen, you make your breakfast, you brush your teeth, whatever that looks like. We have certain things, certain habits that we fall into. And many people would want to say and do say, this is who I am, this is what I am, and I can't change it. I can't change who I am. And the stigma that we want to break this evening is to say, no, you do have a choice. You always have a choice when it comes to habits. And so we want to observe how do we perhaps break those bad habits and put into practice better ones, good habits. Not only good habits, but of course, heavenly, godly habits. Well, the next thing with habits themselves is that they are actions and not necessarily characteristics. Well, what do we mean by that? They are actions, things that we do that hopefully are going to lead to better character, right? They're going to lead to righteousness and godliness and better things. But they do not, in and of themselves, define one's character, right? An example of this. You turn over to the book of Matthew. In Matthew 23, in verse 23, we find Jesus here talking to the Pharisees and the scribes. Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. So just because we put certain practices into place, it does not suddenly change who we are, right? The Pharisees, they did, and by the way, these are not wrong things. They were tithing, they were doing certain things that were good in and of themselves, but they didn't start in the right place, did they? They needed to start with the things that Jesus describes there as weightier, justice and mercy and faith. You start there, and then you move on to the rest, right? That informs what you do after that. So instead, the Pharisees, they started with bad character. They tried to put those things into place, and where did they end up? They still ended up with bad character. And that's the opposite of how we approach that process. And by the way, with this, the Pharisees, they had good habits. And because they have good habits, we do not need to throw away anything good that they did, right? Just because they are pharisaical, hypocritical, and all those things. And some things, we need to observe the good that they did. They were never bashed for reading the Scriptures too much, knowing the Scriptures too much. In fact, they were bashed for knowing the Scriptures so well and yet not knowing what it said, right? Christ says so many times, have you not read, right? You should know this. You are teachers of Israel, and yet you did not know this. So we observe that habits are not necessarily the defining matter of one's character. They are also a means and not an end. So the habit itself is not really what we're after, right? The habit is a tool to allow us to reach a certain goal. For all of you health buffs out there, you think about lifting weights. Lifting weights is not the goal, is it? You're lifting weights in order to gain muscle mass. You're doing that to maybe train for a competition, right? There's always something in the future that you're looking to, but lifting the weights themselves is not what you're after. It's merely a tool to get you to something down the road. Now, conversely, bad habits are usually the means and the end. They're both. We think about this in terms of maybe sitting down to watch a TV show, right? There's not really anything we're seeking to gain from sitting down and watching a show or sports event or whatever, right? We're just doing that to really turn our brains off in many ways, right? To decompress, to have the satisfaction of now. Think about this in terms of meals, right? The meals that we eat each day. We don't have a goal in mind with every meal. The only goal that we have is in the moment, right? We wake up, we eat breakfast, and then what are you thinking about? You're thinking about lunch, right? And then you've had lunch and you're like, well, I'm really looking forward to dinner now. Because maybe lunch was kind of a letdown, so you're really looking forward to dinner. And then dinner's done, like, ooh, breakfast is in the morning. And it's just on and on and on and on, isn't it? Again, we take this maybe a step further in more serious matters. Those who are drug addicts have dealt with alcoholism. They are always living for the moment. They're always looking for that next hit, that next high. And as soon as that is over with, what are they looking for? They're looking for the next hit, for the next high, the next opportunity to take part in something such as that. So with us as Christians, we ought to be seriously considering the habits that we're forming. Because we also ought to be looking past those habits, not just looking in the moment, right? We're looking to a goal, and what is that goal? It's to reach heaven. It is an eternal goal. And so what we do in this life determines if we're going to reach that goal, doesn't it? So we do need to be careful, very careful. 1 Timothy chapter 4 in verse 7, if you want to turn over there, if you're not already over there. 1 Timothy chapter 4 in verse 7. But reject profane and old wives' fables, and exercise yourself toward godliness. So we reject certain things, and we put certain things and implement certain things into our lives, studying, praying, meditating, in order that we would produce godliness. It's not just for the simple pleasure of enjoyment. Those things might be enjoyable to a certain extent, but that's not the goal. The goal is to produce godliness and righteousness. Hebrews chapter 10 in verse 35, do not throw away your confidence, which has great reward. The habits that we form in this life should be getting us closer and closer to the reward that is before us. We look to the reward to shape our habits, right? Not the opposite. Not try to shoehorn in our own will and say, no, I'm going to make this work as I'm going towards this goal. That's not how it works. Not how it works. Well, moving on here, habits also, and this is maybe more commonly what we think of in terms of habits, they form a consistent pattern of life in a certain path, a certain direction that we're taking. And there are exceptions to this, right? Good habits lead in one direction, bad habits lead in another. There are exceptions. The Pharisees, they had good habits in some senses, but they had bad character. We've already observed that. Someone was actually mentioning this the other day, and I was like, I'm going to be mentioning that in my sermon tomorrow, and you may have seen this clip. It's circulated over the years of I think it was a 104-year-old woman who had just celebrated her birthday, 104 104th birthday. I'll get it out in a second. And one of the local news stations, they were interviewing her. And of course, as one does in that type of interview, they asked her, what's the secret to longevity of life? And she said, I've been drinking 3 Dr. Peppers a day for who knows how long, and I'm still here. I've had 2 doctors tell me that if I keep drinking this way, that I'm going to die. Well, guess what? They're both dead, and I'm still here. So she said, I'm going to keep drinking those Dr. Peppers. Fair enough, you're 104 years old. You want to have your Dr. Peppers, go for it. However, that's not really something that we need to be prescribing for everyone, is it? It's not really a healthy lifestyle. It's not a good habit, certainly. And so we understand that. And there are exceptions. But generally speaking, if you form good habits, good things are going to happen, and they're going to lead a certain way. So if you study, if you pray, if you meditate, you come to worship, all of those things, and any other spiritual things that you can think of, they all have benefit, and they all lead to a certain place. But maybe you've had someone that doesn't like that line of thinking, and they want to kick against the goads, as it were. And they say, well, I knew someone that dated a Christian, and look at how they turned up over here. They're in a mess now. Okay, what else you got? It's one example against a millions. It's not really a good standard, is it? Again, we understand that. We look at the Proverbs. This is exactly how the Proverbs are written, aren't they? This is a general rule of thumb that if you lead a life in this way, you can expect this to happen. So we go over to Proverbs chapter 3 in verse 1. Proverbs 3:1. My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. So again, the Proverbs are written with general truths in mind, that if you follow this path, this will happen. Do not forsake the consistent and truthful advice of your parents. But taking that maybe a step further, do not forsake the consistent and truthful instruction of the Lord for flaky and inconsistent advice that the world would throw our way, because it's not going to stand up, is it? It's always almost going to lead to bad destinations. Well, again, a thing that we know that goes along with habits is that they are not formed quickly or often without failure. And this is perhaps also the most difficult part, especially when it comes to forming good habits. Habits take a long time to form. It's something that you often start, you stop because you feel like you failed. Well, then later on you pick it up again, and then maybe you stop again, and you're in that cycle. You may say, when it comes to, let's say, Bible reading, well, I've tried that, and it didn't work for me. Maybe so, but have you considered maybe the reason that it didn't work for you is because you stopped, right? Maybe that particular way in which you were doing it didn't work, but maybe you need to come back to it with different eyes, with a different perspective, and then you go in with new focus and new motivation, and you get right back to it. My grandmother loves to read. I love to read, but she is a reader. During COVID, she was heartbroken because the library was closed, and she couldn't go get her 5 books that week. She reads about 5 books every 2 weeks. And one of the reasons she's able to do that is because if she opens up a book, she gets through a chapter, and she decides, oh, this ain't great. This isn't great. She puts it to the side, and she starts a new book. That's fine for secular things, right? To be able to get to the most literature that you want to. But when it comes to Scripture, we don't put it away and never look at it again. We might set it aside for a time and say, okay, how can I approach this differently to where I can get the best result possible? That's the goal, right? Again, to produce godliness and righteousness. We have to, in many ways, stick with it. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, again, letter of Paul here, 2 Timothy chapter 2, in verse 22, Paul says here, "Flee also youthful lusts, but pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart." You pursue those good things. You go after them with every fiber of your being. You do that. Proverbs 24 and verse 16, "The righteous may fall 7 times and rise again, but the wicked stumbles in calamity." We may fall several times, but our motivation is to keep getting back up and doing the best that we can. Are we going to continue getting back up, or are we going to stay down there in the road, letting the world walk all over us and doing with us what it would have, just doing with us however it pleases? Now, and this is a very important point, maybe one of the most important points when it comes to habits. In order to keep picking those things up and being consistent with them, something has to happen. Something has to change. We have to replace whatever bad is there with something good, right? If the bad remains, then the bad is eventually just going to overtake the good again. We cannot be the servant of 2 masters. We're going to hate one and love the other. Sinful habits, again, they're only replaced with something better. We go over to the book of Ephesians in chapter 4. Ephesians 4 in verse 22. And there's some parallel passages that talk about this as well, but here in particular in Ephesians 4:22, "That you put off concerning your former conduct the old man which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. Therefore, 5:1, be imitators of God as dear children. We put off the old, but we have to take on the new. And that's what happens when we are baptized into Christ. But may we not forget that we have cast off the old man. We can't keep putting back on that old man. He has been cast off. We are to be a new creature. So what Paul says here, he goes through a laundry list, doesn't he? You put away falsehood, you put away anger, and you put on all of these good things. And then we get to the culmination of that in chapter 6. Here's what you can put on. You put on the armor of God, and that will perfectly equip you. Colossians chapter 3 also has some similar things to say there. We won't turn over there, but I do invite you to look at that as a parallel passage. Well, finally, on this point, I don't know, maybe it'll, just fit on the screen. It is so important for us to recognize, with all of the other habits that are out there in the world of people that are trying to sell you something and saying, you've got to try this. and they're so emphatic about it. All of those things are optional at the end of the day. What is not optional are these things. Biblical, godly, heavenly habits. They are essential. And so if we put those habits in place, they're going to bring about the most satisfaction, the most profit. 1 Timothy chapter 4 in verse 8. Again, we've been in the Timothys tonight. 1 Timothy chapter 4 in verse 8. For bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come. So again, the point being here, bodily exercise, that's good. But what's better? What is needed? It is what is spiritual. Godliness. This is most profitable. So God says you must do this. This is necessary. Again, I love to read. I would recommend to you many authors. I would recommend to you many films. But I would have you reject all of those recommendations if you would just pick up this. This I recommend most of all because it will profit the most and it leads towards godliness. Well, with the time that we have, let's look at the value of habits. What is their value? Well, good habits enable us to have greater focus. When you make something a true habit, something that actually is ingrained within you, that is a part of you, you're going to find that you're not easily distracted with other things, right? You're not going to be distracted with everything else that your brain is telling you to do. Now, again, conversely, when you're perhaps reading your Bible, when you're sitting down to pray or to meditate on good and noble things, and it has not become your habit, you are going to find that the things that you've occupied your time with throughout the day otherwise, they're going to start to creep into your mind. And maybe you get sidetracked and distracted. And you've forgotten what you read, you forgot what you've prayed to God. That can very easily happen. But when you do make these things a habit, all of those other things are going to start drifting away by default. The Psalms have a lot to say about this subject. We're not going to turn to all of them, but Psalm 63 is one. Psalm 119 is a great blueprint for that. Talking about waiting for the night watches so that we may remember, we may meditate on good and righteous things. Brother Tom Hawley, again, who we had several months ago for a gospel meeting, he's a student of the Word, loves to read the Bible, talks about Bible reading quite a bit. And a few years ago when he had some health problems, he opted to not take some pain medications that they had prescribed to him. He said, I'm not going to take those. And one of the reasons that he said he did that is he would find himself in the middle of the night in a lot of pain, and he would turn to the Chronicles or the genealogies, and he would start reading them. And he said, I would do that because I thought maybe the pain would allow me to have greater focus on the passages that I struggled to go over. I don't know about you, but that's not really the alternative that I'm usually looking for. I'm going to take those pain medications. But isn't that what we're after? We want to wait for the night watches, to be excited about the fact I have another opportunity to dig into the Word, to maybe learn something more about God, to learn something more about Christ, and to draw closer to Him. That is the goal. I so often hear people say, the world is full of so much more distractions than in the last 40 to 50 years. And I have to tell you, I kind of just have to trust people when they say that, because at the end of the day, I wasn't alive 40 or 50 years ago. I can read about how life was, but I don't quite know how it was. But it is true. Our lives today are filled with many distractions. And so we go about our day working, listening, watching, doing all of the things that overstimulate our minds. And then we come and we try to read maybe just 15 minutes in a day. And we try to get rid of all of those distractions. It's hard. We recognize that. It's not easy oftentimes. And if you have kids, there's often those little distractions that are running around, and there's chaos there, and so we understand that. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible. So you keep working at it. Even if you fall 7 times, you keep getting back up, and you make these things a habit. And by the way, if you are one that finds yourself on all of the platforms, TikTok and Snapchat and Facebook and Instagram, Pinterest, SportsCenter, whatever it is, you're going to find that it is going to be difficult for you to pick this up and to really make it a habit, because you've already made a habit of those other things. So it may be time to start cutting back on a lot of those things. Again, Tom Hawley, he mentions just 1%. And 1% often looks like 10 to 15 minutes a day. It's not very much to ask. But again, 15 minutes a day, in terms of that small goal, that shouldn't be our goal always. We add a little bit more at a time. Always working to see if we can get more in, just a little bit more. And maybe it takes as Jesus had said, you go into your closet and you pray to God. Maybe that is what it takes. Maybe that's the only place where you're going to get any peace and quiet for a moment. If that is, then do it. I was talking with Mr. Brent, my father-in-law, not too long ago, and he said when he was in college, he would really struggle to find a place where he could concentrate on his studies, particularly in biology. And so what he would do is he would go to a developing neighborhood and he would open up his textbook at the end of a cul-de-sac. There's nobody out there. There's nobody working. It's the middle of the night. And he just opened it up and started reading aloud. And he was able to comprehend it that way. And he did a lot better on his tests. And that's true, isn't it? Again, that's one thing that Brother Hawley puts forward as well. Reading aloud, getting as much stimulation as you can. Waiting for the night watches, waiting for the morning, any opportunity you have to get into the Word. Now, when we truly master these habits, we're going to find that they are able to carry us through the most difficult of times. The auditorium class, and I think that was last quarter, but some of the other classes are going through captivity at this point. Daniel is a great example in so many ways, but certainly he's a good example for us to look to when it comes to forming habits. In Daniel 1 in verse 8, he says there, the text says there, he purposed in his heart not to defile himself. Now, I don't get the idea that Daniel had just decided one day, if this specific instance of me defiling myself with the king's food ever comes before me, this is exactly what I'm going to, like this exact scenario. Like, I don't think he had dreamed that up previous to this, right? But I think what he had done is he had prepared himself daily with prayer, and we're going to note that here in a minute, with prayer, with meditation on spiritual things, studying the Word, so that if anything, not just some specific scenario in the king's court came about, but anything came before him that was contrary to what he knew was right, he knew exactly what he was going to hang on to and what he was going to let go of. And that is exactly what we find him doing there in the very first chapter, along with his friends. So his habit was set in place. That's what he was holding on to. For us, we talk about the idea of doing these things when we have time, when the chaos maybe settles, when life is less busy. And I've come to find out, I was ignorant as a teenager. People would say, "Oh, it's not going to get any better." You think life's busy now, it's going to get busier. And I was like, man, it's really busy right now. And I'm not negating that, by the way, for all you young people. I know it is busy. But it is not going to get any easier in a lot of ways, especially if you have the chance to get married, have kids, raise a family. Things get busier in a lot of ways, all good things. But you have to be a lot more deliberate in carving out that time. And so what you do in forming those good habits is that once you have formed them, when the chaos comes, as it did for Daniel, you know exactly what you're going to hang on to and what you're not going to let go of. And if some things have to drift to the wayside, so be it. If it's worth drawing closer to God and drawing your family closer to God. One of the lessons that we teach so often with the little ones in Daniel chapter 6, in verse 10, he prayed 3 times a day. And it says there that he prayed as was his custom since the early days. So he had been doing this since he was a young man, because by the time we reach chapter 6, he's an older man. So he'd been doing this for quite a while. And he did all of those things in the face of the law, which had just been passed, really to target him specifically. He said, no, I ain't doing that. I ain't caving. I know exactly what I'm holding on to. And so we may ask the question, what would you do if crisis entered your life? And you know what the answer should be? Our answer should be how we live our life every day. Every single day. Live a consistent pattern and life of godliness. Well, habits are also the only way that we are going to grow. The only way. 2 Peter chapter 1. 2 Peter chapter 1, in verse 5. We're not going to go through again all of what Peter describes here, but I really would just want to note the first thing that he mentions here. But also for this very reason, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge. Maybe in some of your translations, instead of virtue, it reads moral excellence. Moral excellence. That's a high bar, it would seem like, right? How do we achieve virtue and moral excellence? My sister has been playing the violin now. I've said 10 years previously, but it's been over 10 years now, well over 10 years. And I remember driving her to practice, and at the start, it was like nails on a chalkboard. It did not sound good. But now she is a musician in her own right. And how did she reach that point? Well, she didn't start by playing Mozart. It was row, row, row your boat, Mary had a little lamb, and then you work your way towards that. And how did she do that? Day by day, practice a little bit. And you add a little bit more nuance and maybe complication into the music that you're playing. It was little by little. So we're not going to become great Bible students in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. Again, many of you know Bob Waldron. I don't know him nearly as well as others do, but I've heard accounts, and I'm sure you have as well, of him through the years. Someone might approach him and they compliment him on his knowledge of the Scripture and how he's able to teach so well, and he knows the Scriptures so well, and they say, it's going to take me half a lifetime to get the sort of knowledge that you have, Brother Waldron. And without skipping a beat, he comes back and he says, well, it's taken me a lifetime, and I'm still going. Yep, that's about right. Takes a lifetime. To discern good and evil, we have to exercise, as it were. Make it a habit. Get into the Word, talk to God, think on His goodness. Final point this evening. Habits ultimately make it easier to come back when we do fall. Forming good habits does not mean that we're never going to fail, that we're never going to drop those things, we're never going to come up short. But when we do come back to them, it's going to be like riding a bike, right? It's as if we never forgot, we never left. When King Saul failed so many times, what did he fall back on? Well, he fell back on the only thing that he knew, his pride, his selfishness, self-pity. But when David failed, when Nathan the prophet approaches him in 2 Samuel 12, he goes through that parable, as it were, about the man and the other man's lamb. And Nathan says, "You are the man." What is David's response? He says, "I have sinned before the Lord." And then we get Psalm 51, and we see in more length David's reaction to his own sin. So David's reaction, he snapped back right into the man that we knew he was all along, that man after God's own heart. And it's not that he didn't deal with consequences after that, but he kept going, and he went forward in godliness. So, is our habit to serve God continually, or is it only to serve God occasionally when it suits our needs and our own fancies? If we form good habits now, then when we do fail, it is going to make it that much easier to get back up and to keep going. Ultimately, the question we want to ask, again, we're not just talking about good habits. We're talking about heavenly habits, looking to eternity. That's where we're going. What are you doing here to make sure that you are going to reach that goal? Again, we can't do it by ourselves. God is the one that helps us. God has provided us the tools. He's given us His Word, His mind. He's revealed His will to us. Let's be sure that we're not letting the tools rust in the shed. Pick them up, use them. I hope that this lesson has been of encouragement to you. This is certainly always a lesson that I need to hear. If there is anyone here in the audience this evening that needs to respond to the gospel call, certainly we would encourage you to do that this evening. If you are not in Christ and you wish to be, we can help you with that this evening. If you have been baptized into Christ but you have left the path, you can get back on that path this evening. Whatever your need might be, won't you come as we stand and as we sing.